Okay, so as mentioned earlier on, today's workshop, the fifth workshop for our voices, is the photo editing post production, and it's four things that we're looking into today with regarding one, corrections, underexposures and overexposures, how to fix them on the programs such as Lightroom and Flickr. It's built in. There's an editing component into Flickr, and I'll show you that as well. And the second one is enhancements. How can we take full advantage of colors? The third is cropping, so going back to our composition. And four is black and whites. Regarding these softwares, all of the computers will have these softwares, so we'll have login times for the computers. When you have a chance during the week, you can just come by the center and you can log on to one of these computers and you'll have Lightroom installed. So for Macs, you'll have this. It'll look exactly the same in other computers. So Lightroom, you just go on ahead and open that program. And I've pre-uploaded some photos here from our past workshops to illustrate sort of those four things. The first one, corrections. I couldn't find extreme conditions of underexposure or overexposure, but I was able to find two images that we can use to illustrate these corrections for this workshop. So let's do underexposure first. So underexposure usually means dark. Alright, so it's very easy. First of all, this interface here, I've already pre-uploaded it. But once you open it up, obviously you're not going to have anything. Make sure that this ribbon here, you have it on library, right? And that will pop this important export buttons out. So once you have that in the library, because notice if you go to develop, it's going to disappear. You're like, what the heck was Brian talking about, right? So go to library first, and then you'll be able to import the photos wherever you've saved them, right, into Lightroom through this. So wherever you saved those photos, you can locate them through here. So I'm just going to cancel that, and then it'll import here. But once you want to start photo editing, make sure that you're on develop, right? So go on ahead and develop, and I'm just going to zoom in a bit. Okay. So this photo was taken by Kebs, and it is of Keb's grandmother. And we notice here that it's a bit underexposed. So on your right side here is all the tools that you'll be needing to make these corrections. And these are presets, but it's more control if you just focus your attention on this side of the interface. You'll notice here right off the bat you'll have exposure, right? Contrast, and exposure is quite general. What it will do is either lighten up the whole thing, right off the bat, you can just, or darken the whole thing. You don't have the same kind of flexibility. Say if you just want to highlight or lighten up the whites and the lights, right? You want to scroll down a bit more and look into, well, actually it's just right on the bottom here, not very far. And you can look into these slides right below the exposure. So notice how this is very general, right? Whereas here you can pick out highlights, right? And it'll just pick out the highlights to, well, to make it lighter. So you notice how the flame there and the color white off of Nana's sweater, they're the only things that are going darker or lighter, right? Because they're the highlights of the photo. So maybe What's highlight? Like the focus? No, highlight is in your spectrum here. So you'll have the first one here. It's kind of small, but highlights, right? It'll just pick out the lightest parts of your photo. Your shadows, of course, you can also make that lighter or darker, right? So for example, I just want to focus on shadow here. I don't want this any brighter. I'm just going to see what it does. So on my shadow, only the dark parts will get lighter, right?
That's what
Right. or only the shadows will get darker, and you notice how the flame stays intact, and the whiteness of the sweater stays intact. So again, you can play around with those four. So you have your highlights, shadows. Whites will be your midtones, and blacks will be as well your midtones for your shadows. Whereas highlights is to the extreme end of the lights, and shadows will be to the extreme of your darks, right? So these four here give you more control. It lets you pick which spectrum of the exposure you want to be fiddling around with, whereas exposure is quite general. It'll just either lighten the whole thing up or darken the whole thing up, right? So for Nanai, I just want to go with the shadows and give it a nice tidbit of more light, and maybe the whites a bit more, but maybe I want it contrasted, so I'm gonna go with blacks, right? So okay, I say I like that. I'm gonna save it. I'm just gonna leave it be. So one of the cool things about Lightroom is you don't have to keep on going to file and save or whatever. It doesn't even say save as here, like Photoshop or other programs, right? Or save anywhere, because each and every time you move these slides, it automatically saves it as a file in Lightroom. And by the end of it, you say, okay, I'm happy with this, right? It's forevermore saved in Lightroom's catalog. And if you want to export, you now have to go back to library again, and then you can select and then export, right? And then you can open it up in other applications. So let's go back to develop. So those are exposures, but I also like to fiddle around with the three things under presence here. Clarity, what it does, and it's too bad that this photo is not big and it's pixelated, but what clarity does is it really makes the contrast a lot stronger. So if I go clarity +1 and I keep on going plus, you can see that it becomes more vibrant, whereas if I go down, it becomes kind of more lulled, right? So the easy thing about Lightroom is that you can just play around and you can instantaneously see what those slides will do to your photo, and you decide whether you like it or not. So that's like the best thing about Lightroom. People that do this for a living use it, but also it's so easy that anyone can use it, right? So
I have a question.
yeah.
How would you reset all these values?
So if you're like, oh man, I totally messed up, I was not supposed to have that blue, and I was not supposed to have that overblown, and oh my gosh, the blacks are just off.
Is there an undo?
This makes it look like a, I don't know, it's just, oh, I'm so sorry, Nanay, right? So I do apologize for this mishap, but guess what? You can either go simply reset, or if you just want to correct one thing that you did, then you just go undo. But it won't say reset setting, right? Because I just did the whole thing right now, so it'll say undo reset setting.
Or Command Z.
Yeah. So don't worry too much if you mess up. You can just seriously just don't worry about it. Hit the reset button, right? Mistakes will help us to improve. That's what they're for. But don't make too much of them. Otherwise, you fail. No, just joking. So again, for those corrections right now under exposure, those are the main key things, right? And don't be afraid to just kind of play around with these slides, and notice how here some of them are not active. So to activate these functions, just simply expand them. This is the best photo that I can work with right now to illustrate overexposure and how to correct overexposure. Oh, this was a photo taken by our very own Sebastian, local talent. Sorry, Bastian. Great talent coming out of UFT. Right? So the reason why I chose this is that it's very bright, not overly exposed, because I mean, I guess the focus is on the branches, but say that you want to make this for some reason to like your own subjective taste. You want it a bit darker, and that it's way too light for you, right? You go back, so that's library. You go back to develop so that it goes to this interface here. You're going to treat this the same way. You can simply darken this up. And the cool thing with overexposed things is when you get things overexposed and you're like, oh, it's just totally blown out, right? Everything's just so white, and I'm losing out on all the information, like the data on that digital file. The cool thing is, especially when you go to highlights and if you want to lessen it, so you're going to the left, you're sliding to the left, and that gives you to the negative values. Notice how the white spots are. Kind of doesn't hold that much, like detail there. If you now move to the left, yeah, this is not doing much. If you move this to the left a bit, you get a bit of the blue kind of detail there of the sky, and you get a little bit more where the sky meets the cloud, right? So it's a bit more detail that gives you when you fix your overexposed photos, and that's just going down into the negative. See, the numbers here are all going a bit more down into the negatives, right? But say, okay, it's good that I have my sky there now, and that I can tell which which part is sky and which part is cloud. But then I don't want my leaves, right, and my branches as dark as this. So now you remember when I was telling you that you have more control with these four here: highlights, shadows, blacks, and whites. I would go with my blacks here because that's mainly what these pixels are made out of, and I'll put that to the plus, and it'll only treat that, right, that part of the picture, not the whole thing. So you notice the blue stays, whereas the darks become a bit lighter than they were, right? So this is how it was, right? And then you can make that as best you can lighter. It's very slight at this with this particular example, but that's what you can do. And of course you can probably go into the shadows too, because the branches are heavily shadowed, and put that into the plus side as well, and that brings it up, right, to a more exposed tree. Okay, so these four here is really sort of your main slides when it comes to correcting underexposure and overexposures. Oh, and by the way, if you go into library and you're like, how do I get to my other pictures? Why is this the only picture? Down here, we'll give you the grid. It's very self-explanatory, as you can see by the icons, right? It gives you the grid. Okay, so moving on to the second part of the photo editing, which is enhancements. I'm going to choose Michaela's photo here, and this already is a very nice photograph of this little cutie, and she is just wearing a really nice pink dress. It's bright, and it's contrasting this green, right? But I'm like, oh man, I just want this to be more perfect to do justice to this very cute little being. Alright. You notice how these parts here, the tones, right, the exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites and blacks, that has to do with your lighting, your exposure. Whereas it says presence here, that has to do with your detail, especially with clarity. So play around with clarity for a bit. If we look now, if I slide to the negatives, it blows it out a bit and makes it softer, right? Maybe that's the effect that you want, and this is really good with portraits, especially for some people that don't have like the perfect skin. You can do that digitally. But that's not the whole point of it. So you want to get clarity. You want to get a glowing effect in certain cases and certain circumstances, but sometimes you want to get a really kind of stark and heavily not saturated but detailed and sharp, right? So this
show your wrinkles.
Yeah, let's turn her into an old person now, magically. So if you go to the right, to the positives, right, of the slide, you notice how this is the original. We've already done the softened version of it. So now if you go to the plus side, it makes it sharper, right? So it's very slight with this one, but I'm going to do the slide again, and you can just notice how it gives you the preview. It's really quick. So if you want more detail to come through and sharper picture, go with the plus side with your clarity, right? So vibrance is pretty much the same. Vibrance and saturation is pretty much the same effect, but this is dealing now with color, right? This is with contrast and detail, right? Colors pretty much stay the same, right? But vibrance and saturation will deal with your colors. For example, vibrance, I want to just kind of get that pink and green, and you notice now that it's very bright. Or you can maybe want to, you know, lessen that color. So either negative or positive. I'm just gonna go at it with the really bright green and pink. And saturation, right, is to the same effect, going to make your colors, well, superficially super colorful, right? But I don't want to do that because I just turned her into like I just turned her into like a carrot, right? So maybe I don't want to do that so much. So play around with these and see what they do. In function, vibrance and saturation is very similar, right? So okay, I'm just gonna leave her at that. So those are enhancements under number 2 that you can really look into, which is pretty much the presence here, right? Okay. And again, sharpening tool, pretty self-explanatory, right? If you want it more sharp than this, right? First, you're being way too much, or maybe you just want to make it a lot sharper than it actually is. You can just play around with it. This gives you a preview, and sometimes when it's too sharp, all this unwanted detail shows, and you're like, I don't want my, you know, my baby girl to look like, you know. So you might not want to fill around with that, right? So you want to preserve the baby skin there, not give her like some sort of weird cracks on her face. So that's another thing that you can fill around with, right? So enhancements with color. Okay, so moving down to our third, cropping. That's very practical. It's very simple, but again, it goes back to your principles of composition, right? I'm going to choose actually this one here by Pat. This one is already a really kind of well composed photo here. And even though the person is off to the side like that, and it's just, you know, a piece of their ear, right? A piece of their head, side of their body included, she composed it like this because, I mean, the focus is on these, right? On the dumbbells. And your cropping comes in handy if you're not really happy with such compositions, right? So that you can compose them some other way. So maybe you're like, oh, this looks too weird. I wanted to focus, not that I'm saying that it is, because I like it. But say I only want to really get the hand with the dumbbell here, and I want to exclude this, right? It's very self-explanatory. Go on ahead and fill around with these corners here. So a couple of things. If you hold on to a corner, you notice how this is free moving like this, and you can choose whatever parameters and shapes that you would want your photograph to be. But say you want to keep it as a square, so what you would do is hover on top of that corner there and press down shift and keep it there, and what it'll do is it'll just keep that square, that same shape of the original frame, right? So maybe I don't want to keep it like that. I want it to be more rectangle, so I'm just going to free flow it and eyeball it and say, okay, I only want to include this onto my photo, right? To really emphasize the dumbbell, click it, and you've done your cropping, you've done your recomposition. So that's really simple, right? So the cropping tool is this grid here with the dashed parameters. or going to our fourth, which is the black and whites. Go back to this. Maybe I want to turn her into black and white now. Oh, I don't like what I did here. I'm gonna reset her. So go back to your develop so that you can actually make those changes. I'm gonna reset her, right? And maybe I wanna do a really close shot, a portrait shot of her face, and maybe just include her head, not so much the whole thing, right? So I'm going to shift to keep that original shape. I'm going to shift. This is weird. I'm going to shift. Oh, what am I doing? Sorry, guys. Must be a new version.
Sure.
And there. Okay. So I'm doing two things here, right? First, I'm cropping it, and secondly, I want to turn it into a black and white photo. And your presets here gives you black and white presets, so they've already kind of like made it easy for you. You can just click it, but I don't like presets because they don't give me the same flexibility. You're stuck with that certain kind of effect, right? So for example, black and white presets, BNW. It gives you a preview here as well before you even apply it, right? So high contrast, low contrast, and there's certain looks that they put. So I'm gonna choose 3, and I'm like, oh man, it's so grainy, right? I actually don't like it. I like the contrast of the black and white, but I don't want it to be so grainy. So once you put those presets onto your photo here, go back to your, it will actually give you more control on how you want to fix this preset that you want, but you don't want the graininess of it. So let me look for that here now. So your grains will be under, let me just check these ones, sorry guys. Under effects, right? And again, this will be uploaded on YouTube and everything is going to be there, and memorizing this you need not to do right now. So under effects, you'll find your grain here. I know that my amount is all the way up there, but I want less of it. You simply just, keep it to a lower amount, so 15 rather than 60, and that gets rid of all that grain. Let's say from the original, say I want to keep my grains just to a minimum like that, and I'm happy with it. And again, maybe I want to make the blacks more darker. Shadow like that, blacks like that. But then I want her skin to show through more, so I'm going to lighten her up like so, right? And I'm happy with this, so I'm going to keep it. And just remember that whatever the presets are, even though they're presets, you can always tweak them some more on this side of the screen, right? Okay, so black and white. So corrections, enhancements, cropping, and black and white on Lightroom. I want to show you guys before we get to Cherry's part something cool on Flickr. Ayate. So Flickr is really cool because it actually has a built-in editing program right into the site, right? Not a lot of photo editing sites do that, so take advantage of this. Lightroom is harder to get your hands on, right? Because you have to find it on the internet and you gotta get the codes. Unless you're like savvy with that stuff, then go right ahead. But this is for free. Flickr's for free, and it's easily accessible. So for example, I wanna enhance Mako here, and once you pull out this preview page, where you have the 3 dots over here, this gives you a bunch of options. And what I want you guys to remember is edit photo in Aviary. The Aviary is the component of Flickr that I'm talking about that lets you edit your photo right into Flickr, right? Okay, so once you're in Aviary, this is how it's going to look like. This is also self-explanatory, like the Lightroom, you can get the previews right away once you put a certain effect. So for example, Mako here, right? I know that this photo was taken with film, so it might be different from a digital camera, but fool around with the effects here. One particular effect that I want to draw your attention to is something called splash, and Judy had this photo, right, where the photo is black and white, but there's only one part of that photo that is in color. So what that does is it emphasizes that one thing, right? And you can do that with Flickr. It's really easy actually to do. Let me just check Judy's photo first to show you what I'm talking about. So this one here, she's turned it into a black and white photo, but you notice that the watch, right, is still in color, right, and it sticks right out. Maybe this is a technique that you want to use on your photos to emphasize a certain component of your photo. So how do you do that? Go back to Flickr, and you remember how to get onto Aviary, right? Those three dots, and it says Edit Photo in Aviary, and this pops up. And the certain button that you want to click here is Splash. So go ahead and click that Splash button, and you notice how the photo goes black and white, right? You have three sizes of brushes here, and what these brushes will do, right, is keep the color of your selection. You see how that, yeah, so it's really cool. So
if you only need a small part, you use the small brush?
yeah, if you only need a small brush, go on ahead and just use a brush here that's smaller. But if you say, oh, I actually didn't want that colored because it's just the background, I want Mako to shine. He's the star of this piece. So go on ahead and erase those colors off, right? And the only thing I want to colorize here is Mako's face here. His boyish looks here, right? Look, it's a colored eye. It's not a black eye. It's a colored eye.
Reminds me of like a dog. You know those dogs?
Donation.
Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and use this size here. I think it's enough, and just colorize this part of Mako to bring his smile, his boyish smile, to life more. But I'm like, okay, here I'm getting to a tight spot where I don't want to go beyond his chin, but not color his what is that, hand. I'm going ahead and use the small one. Okay. So Judy might have had
So did she do that?
a thing on her phone already that does that, but this gives you more control, and it's on Flickr. The best thing about using these filters on Flickr is that it doesn't diminish the quality of your picture, the resolution. The resolution is intact. So whatever these filters are, it does it on top of that resolution. So it doesn't make it smaller in file, right? So Mako here looks complete. I'm really happy with my work here, masterpiece. I'm gonna go ahead and apply it, and I'm gonna go ahead and save it.
How come it chooses
To a
that
new
color?
thing. Pardon me?
How come it chooses that color?
What?
Like, why is he orange?
Yeah.
That is actually from the original. So if you notice here, I'm not gonna replace the old photo. I'm just going to make a new one so we can do a comparison here, right? Save that.
Takes up a lot of memory.
Well, this particular one, because the file is a big file, so. Done. After. Okay. All right. So it's actually seemingly more orange than before because your eyes are playing tricks on you. Everything else in that photo is black and white. So whatever that color is, it's you're getting fooled by your eyes telling you that it's more colorful in comparison to the rest of the photo, which is just black and white. But it's actually the same hues, the same values in your color, There's nothing different to it, right? Because that filter or that effect, right, plays on top of whatever that file is. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete this now since we've done that bit of tutorial. Anyways, we can probably save that for later, right? So Aviary is really simple to use. There's a lot more that you can do with it, and for the interest of time, just go ahead and play around with it. Doesn't need a long explanation. It's very simple to use. Although there are also a lot of presets. So if I go back to Aviary, right? Which one was it? Orientation, effects. Effects are just presets. This doesn't really give you. This is like what we find on our phones, right? Like different filters, right? I'm gonna use Lucky on Mac right now, and you can see the previews here and how they're going to change, right? And there's a lot more here, but I'm gonna go on ahead and use Lucky, and okay, funky. I'm just gonna go ahead and apply it. So it works very much like your phone, but to a lot more options and level of control, right? So that is Flickr and Aviary in Flickr, and how you can use this free site to fix and enhance your photos. So any questions regarding the photo editing in Lightroom and in Flickr so far? So when you get a chance, play around with them. That's like the best way to learn about these programs. They're really simple, as you can see. They're very visual. You don't have to go to like file or where can I whatever and like that, because everything is set out in front of you in visual form and in slides. And it's the same thing with Flickr, right? So just experiment on how those things work, and see what gives what results from each button. So that's it for my part.